It was a quiet evening in a small town, the kind of evening where the streets seemed calmer than usual, and the lights from the little shops and houses flickered softly, casting warm glows onto the sidewalks. In the town hall, people were gathering for a casual event, something meant to bring the community together. The hall was cozy but well kept, with wooden floors that creaked slightly when people walked, and walls lined with old photographs showing moments from past gatherings. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and a small stage sat at the front, where a shiny black piano waited, polished and ready. Among the attendees was a woman who blended easily into the crowd. She wasn't someone who stood out at first glance. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, and her hair was tied back neatly. She smiled politely at the people she knew, but mostly she stayed quiet, taking in the room without drawing attention to herself. She had always been someone who preferred the background, who found comfort in small moments rather than the spotlight. She had come to the hall with a friend, who had insisted she should sit at the piano for just a short moment. "It'll be simple," her friend had said. "Just a few notes. Something light for the people to enjoy. Nothing serious." At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to performing in front of a group, especially one that didn't know her. But her friend's encouragement, mixed with a quiet confidence in herself, made her agree. She thought, a few simple notes can't hurt. As she approached the stage, she noticed the piano up close. It was a beautiful instrument, the kind that could make ordinary music sound magical if played with skill. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the smoothness beneath her touch. The audience was chatting softly, still unaware of who she was. Some glanced at her politely, assuming she was just another community member stepping up for a small role in the evening's program. She sat on the piano bench, adjusted it to a comfortable height, and took a deep breath. Her heart beat a little faster, but not from fear, more from anticipation, a quiet excitement at the idea of playing music, of letting the notes come alive. She reminded herself that this was just a small request, a simple tune, nothing more. She didn't need to impress anyone. She just needed to play. The audience began to notice her presence more as she settled in. People paused their conversations, curious about who this woman was. Some whispered to their neighbors, guessing what she might play. "Do you know her?" one person asked. Another shook their head. "I don't think so. Maybe she's new around here." No one expected much. After all, she didn't look like someone who would perform with any kind of skill. She seemed ordinary. The first moment she pressed a key, a soft note floated through the hall. It was simple, gentle, unassuming. People nodded politely, some smiled, and a few leaned back in their chairs, expecting more of the same. The note was light, like a small ripple in a quiet pond. She played a second note, and then a third, following the simple tune she had promised. Her hands moved smoothly, but carefully, as though testing the waters. But there was something in the way she played that caught a few observant listeners off guard. Her fingers didn't just press the keys. They seemed to dance over them, almost floating, finding each note with ease. There was a subtle confidence in her touch, a rhythm that felt natural yet precise. It was not flashy or showy, but there was a softness to the music that made people stop and listen a little more closely. Some audience members glanced at each other, sensing that the performance was not entirely ordinary. A few children sitting near the front tilted their heads, listening intently, as if they were trying to understand the feeling the music was creating. Even the older folks, who had been chatting and laughing moments ago, turned toward the stage, their attention fully captured. The woman herself didn't speak. She didn't announce her skills or her experience. She didn't need to. Her music spoke for her. Each note she played seemed to tell a story, one that the audience hadn't expected. There was a quiet intensity in her playing, a way of expressing something deeper than the simple tune she had been asked to perform. It was like she was giving life to the music, letting it flow naturally, and letting the room feel it with her. For a moment, the hall was completely still. No coughs, no shuffling of feet, no whispers. Just the soft echo of the piano filling the space. People leaned forward in their chairs, drawn in by a sense of curiosity and awe they hadn't anticipated. Some faces showed surprise, as if they had suddenly realized that this woman, who had seemed ordinary, could create something remarkable. She glanced briefly at the audience, but only to sense their reaction, not for validation. There was no nervousness, only a quiet understanding that the music belonged in that room at that moment. She let her hands guide her, trusting the melody that seemed to be forming naturally beneath her fingers. Each note was gentle yet deliberate, creating a flow that carried the listeners along without them even realizing it. A few people whispered softly, unsure if they were hearing what they thought they were hearing. She's good," one said. Another shook their head in disbelief. "I didn't expect this at all." There was an unmistakable feeling in the room, a shared sense of surprise and wonder. Something ordinary had just begun to reveal something extraordinary. Time seemed to stretch. The simple tune she had started with slowly began to take shape, becoming more intricate yet still delicate. It wasn't rushed or overplayed. Every sound had meaning, every pause had purpose. The audience began to sense that this was not just a casual performance. This was something personal, something real. Music that came from experience, from emotion, from a place that only a few could reach. Even though she had only intended to play a few simple notes, she found herself drawn deeper into the music. It wasn't about impressing anyone or showing off. It was about letting the melody unfold naturally. And as it did, the hall seemed to transform. The ordinary space of the community gathering became alive with sound, as if the music was painting invisible colors in the air, colors that only the heart could see. By now, everyone was listening intently. People who had been indifferent at first were now leaning forward, their eyes fixed on her hands as they moved effortlessly over the keys. The whispers faded into silence, replaced by the pure experience of listening. There were no interruptions, no distractions, only the connection between the music, the pianist, and the audience. She paused for just a brief moment, allowing a soft silence to settle in the room. The pause was not accidental. It added depth to the music, letting the notes linger in the minds of those listening. A few people exhaled softly, as if they had been holding their breath without realizing it. There was a feeling that something rare was happening, something unexpected and precious. At that moment, it was clear to everyone present that this woman, who had seemed so ordinary, was not ordinary at all. Her talent, her skill, her way of expressing through music, it was something that could not be ignored. She had come to play a simple tune, just a polite gesture for the gathering. But she had already begun to create a moment that would be remembered. The first part of her performance, the simple beginning, had already done more than entertain. It had captured hearts. It had shifted expectations. And most importantly, it had reminded everyone in the room that sometimes extraordinary things can come from the most unexpected places. As the last note of this first part echoed gently through the hall, the audience remained still for a heartbeat longer. They were not ready to speak, not yet. They were taking in what they had just experienced, savoring the quiet magic of it. Some smiles appeared, soft and tentative, while others simply stared, eyes wide in disbelief, and through it all, the woman remained calm and humble. She had not sought attention or praise. She had only wanted to fulfill a small request, to play a few notes. Yet, unknowingly, she had begun something much bigger. She had begun to turn a simple request into a story that would captivate every person in that hall. A story told not with words, but with the universal language of music. That moment, the stage seemed bigger than before, not because of its size, but because of the potential it now held. The simple act of sitting at the piano had opened a door to something extraordinary. And the audience, even without realizing it, was ready to step through it with her. This was only the beginning. The first few notes had been soft and simple, just enough to please the audience politely. But as she continued, something unexpected began to happen. Her fingers moved with a quiet confidence, almost instinctively, guiding the melody beyond the basic tune she had intended. Each note started to flow into the next effortlessly, creating a pattern that felt natural and alive. It was subtle at first, a slight variation in rhythm, a small flourish on a key that nobody expected. Yet it caught the ears of those listening. People shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward slightly, curious about the change. There was a feeling in the room that the music was no longer just a polite performance. It was becoming something more, something personal. The woman's face was calm, focused, and serene, yet there was a faint smile, a quiet joy in her expression. She was not performing for praise or attention. She was simply letting the music flow through her. The melody grew richer. The simple tune she had been asked to play began to evolve, gaining depth and emotion. Her hands moved with a delicate balance of control and freedom, each finger striking the keys with purpose. The notes intertwined, forming a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and harmonious. The audience felt it immediately. They could sense that what they were hearing was not ordinary, that this was something special unfolding in front of them. A few of the listeners exchanged glances. Their eyebrows rose, their mouths slightly open in surprise. "Did you hear that?" One whispered. She's doing something incredible," said another. The room, which had been filled with polite chatter just moments ago, had now grown completely silent. All eyes were on her, yet no one dared interrupt the magic that was forming in the air. The woman's music was no longer just a tune. It was a story. Each phrase carried emotion, shifting effortlessly from light and playful to soft and melancholic. It was as if she were speaking through the piano, telling a tale that words could never fully capture. Some listeners felt a shiver run down their spines, while others closed their eyes to soak in the experience fully. Even those who had initially doubted her skill now sat completely captivated. Caught in a moment that seemed both intimate and grand at the same time, her fingers danced over the keys, moving faster now, but with perfect precision. What had begun as a few simple notes had turned into a flowing improvisation. She didn't follow a strict pattern or sheet music. She let the music guide her, following a rhythm that was uniquely her own. There was freedom in the way she played, yet every note was deliberate. It was effortless yet powerful, simple yet profound. The audience could not help but notice the transformation. Some leaned closer to hear the subtleties in the sound, others stared at her hands, trying to understand how someone could create such beauty so naturally. There were small gasps, quiet whispers of astonishment, but mostly there was silence, a deep, respectful silence that filled the hall. The music had taken over, and everyone present was completely immersed. The woman's eyes remained focused, yet there was a sparkle of emotion that showed just how deeply connected she was to the piano. She moved with grace, each hand complementing the other. One played the melody, the other created gentle harmonies, and together they produced a sound that seemed larger than the instrument itself. The piano became an extension of her, a voice through which she could share something beyond words. It was not only the technical skill that impressed the audience, but also the feeling behind it. There was a warmth in the music that touched hearts. Some listeners felt memories stirring, emotions long buried coming to the surface. Others simply felt joy and wonder as if witnessing a rare miracle. The beauty of the moment was in its authenticity. It was not staged or rehearsed for applause. It was real, and that made it even more powerful. A young boy sitting near the front had been fidgeting just moments ago. Now he was completely still, eyes wide, hands resting quietly in his lap. An older woman in the back wiped a tear from her eye, though she tried to do so discreetly. A few people clasped their hands together, as if holding on to the moment for fear it might disappear. Everyone could feel that this was no ordinary performance. It was a gift, a rare moment of human connection through music. The music continued to evolve. She began to incorporate small variations, shifting tempos slightly, adding delicate trills that made the tune sparkle. The melody rose and fell like waves on a calm sea, each swell carrying emotion, each pause offering reflection. It was mesmerizing. People could not predict what would come next, yet everything felt perfectly natural, as if it had always been meant to happen. Some of the audience members had experienced live music many times before, but this felt different. It was not just sound. It was emotion, it was storytelling, it was a conversation without words. And what made it even more remarkable was that the woman playing was someone they had assumed to be ordinary. She had not announced herself as a performer, she had not sought attention. Yet she held the room in a spell that even the most experienced listeners could not ignore. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward the audience, not in search of validation, but perhaps to gauge their reactions. And there they were, wide-eyed, leaning in, some smiling softly, others in quiet amazement. She noticed, but it did not change her. She simply continued, letting her heart guide her fingers, letting the music carry the story forward. The audience began to forget the small request that had started this evening. The simple tune had long vanished, replaced by an evolving masterpiece. The hall was no longer just a hall, it was a space filled with beauty, emotion, and wonder. People forgot their phones, forgot small distractions, forgot that they were just attending a local gathering. They were part of something much larger, a moment that touched something deep within their hearts. Her music now carried a sense of intimacy. Each note seemed to reach out to someone in the room personally. A man in the corner, who had been skeptical at first, felt his chest tighten as if the music were speaking directly to him. A teenager who had been scrolling on a phone moments ago now sat completely still, fully present. The woman had somehow transformed a simple community gathering into an unforgettable experience for every person present. As the performance progressed, the variation in the music became more noticeable. She explored different tempos and moods, gently contrasting softness with strength, lightness with intensity. The audience could feel the story unfolding without needing words. There were moments that made people hold their breath, moments that brought tears, and moments that filled them with pure, unexplainable joy. Even those who initially assumed they would only witness a small, polite performance could not tear their eyes away. There was a quiet awe that filled the room. People whispered among themselves occasionally, but not out of distraction, only to share their wonder. "Did you hear that? She's amazing. I didn't expect this at all." Their voices were hushed, full of respect for the gift they were witnessing. The woman's fingers moved faster now, but there was no haste. Every motion had intention, every sound had meaning. The piano's resonance filled the hall completely, each note lingering in the air longer than expected. The audience felt like they were traveling somewhere, moving with the flow of the music. It was immersive, almost as if the room itself had disappeared, leaving only the sound and the hearts listening to it. There was no showmanship, no exaggerated gestures, only music that spoke for itself. And yet the effect was mesmerizing. People felt the emotion, the skill, and the quiet beauty behind every note. It was clear that this was someone who had not just learned to play the piano, but who had lived through music, felt it, and could now express it in a way that connected deeply with others. A few minutes passed, though it felt much longer. The music had grown richer and more layered, yet still gentle, still flowing. Every person in the audience was caught in the moment, unable to think about anything else. The room had transformed from an ordinary gathering space into something extraordinary, a place where the music told stories that words could never describe, and through it all, the woman remained humble. She had started this performance to fulfill a simple request, but as her fingers danced across the keys, she had unknowingly turned a modest tune into something magical. She did not pause to look for applause or approval. She played because she had to, because the music lived within her and needed to be shared. By the end of this part of her performance, the audience could feel that something remarkable had begun. They did not yet fully understand the extent of what they were witnessing, but they knew that it was extraordinary. The simple request had already transformed into a performance that stirred emotions, captured hearts, and left everyone silently in awe. And so, as the last notes of this part lingered in the air, there was a sense of anticipation. Something more was coming, something that would elevate the experience even further. The hall remained silent for a heartbeat, everyone still absorbing what they had just heard. The music had grown beyond expectation, and the audience, completely captivated, waited eagerly for what would come next. This was not just a performance. It was a beginning. By now, the music had completely transformed the atmosphere of the hall. What had started as a simple, polite tune had evolved into something far more beautiful than anyone could have expected. The audience, which had been quietly curious at first, was now fully captivated. Every note she played seemed to command attention, not by force, But by its sheer honesty and emotional depth, people in the crowd had stopped moving almost entirely. Conversations had faded, laughter had disappeared, and even the children who had been fidgeting at the front were sitting perfectly still, their eyes wide with wonder. Every person in the hall seemed to lean forward, as if physically drawn closer to the piano, to catch every subtle detail of her performance. It was as though the music itself had a gravity, pulling the listeners into its world. Some faces revealed disbelief. People whispered to each other softly, barely daring to break the spell of the moment. "Is she really playing this?" One woman murmured. "It sounds incredible," said another, her voice tinged with awe. Even those who had been skeptical when she first sat down were now silent, their earlier assumptions fading with each passing note. The ordinary woman in a simple dress had become the center of attention. Though she herself remained calm and unassuming, the melody began to shift in subtle ways. What had been gentle and flowing now carried small bursts of intensity, rising and falling like waves. It was not chaotic or hurried, but deliberate, like she was telling a story without words. Some listeners could almost feel the emotion behind the music, the joy, the longing, the quiet strength that seemed to flow from her very being. Each note resonated deeply, touching hearts in ways that words could never reach. Her hands moved across the keys with grace and precision. Yet there was a freedom to her movements that made the music feel alive. It was not just technical skill. It was expression. Every phrase seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting naturally, as if the piano itself were alive and responding to her touch. People began to lean closer instinctively, some even closing their eyes. As though shutting out the world to hear the music more clearly, a few audience members tried to guess what she would play next. But the music was unpredictable in the most beautiful way. Each variation was fresh yet harmonious, complex yet easy to follow. It held their attention completely, leaving no room for distraction. The performance was no longer a simple act of playing notes, it had become an experience. A journey that everyone in the room was taking together. The woman's expression remained calm, but there was a subtle joy that showed in her eyes. She was lost in the music, yet fully aware of the audience's presence. She did not play to impress. She played to share. And as she did, she connected with every person in the hall. Some listeners felt a lump in their throat, others felt a tear slip down silently. The music had a way of speaking directly to the heart, bypassing thoughts and reaching straight into emotion. People began to notice the tiny details, the touches that made the performance extraordinary. The way her fingers trailed lightly over the keys, creating soft echoes. The way she paused for just the right amount of time, letting a note linger in the air before moving on. The subtle variations in tempo that made the music feel alive and breathing. It was the small, thoughtful details that made her playing so mesmerizing. Some audience members whispered to each other, unable to contain their amazement entirely. "She's incredible," one said softly. "I've never heard anything like this." Another nodded, unable to speak, just smiling in quiet admiration. The hall was filled with an unspoken agreement. What they were witnessing was extraordinary. The performance had gone beyond expectation, and everyone sensed that they were seeing something rare and special. The music itself seemed to respond to the audience's reactions. She shifted gently between melodies, letting the softer, more tender notes fill the pauses where listeners were holding their breath. Then she would rise to a more powerful, soaring phrase, and the audience would feel the emotion swell within them, as if they were part of the music itself. It was a delicate balance of control and feeling, and it captivated everyone present. A few children sitting near the front were now completely silent, their eyes fixed on the moving fingers that created the magic. One little girl leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, mesmerized, while a boy whispered softly, almost to himself, "She's amazing." Even the adults found themselves unconsciously holding their breath, hanging on to every note, every delicate transition in the melody. The woman's calm demeanor added to the effect. She was not dramatic or theatrical. She did not exaggerate her movements or make a show of her skill. Everything came naturally, effortlessly. It was clear that her talent was not new or sudden, it was part of her. Something she had lived with and cultivated quietly without needing recognition or applause. And that authenticity made the performance all the more compelling. As the music progressed, it became clear that she was telling a story. Each section of her playing seemed to reflect a different emotion or scene. Sometimes the notes were light and playful, like a gentle dance in a sunny field. Other times, the melody turned softer, more introspective, carrying a sense of longing or nostalgia. The audience felt these shifts intuitively, as if they were reading a story written not in words, but in sound. The hall itself seemed to change under the influence of the music. The ordinary space, with its wooden floors and familiar walls, now felt alive. The piano sound filled every corner, creating a sense of intimacy despite the room's size. People who had been casually attending the gathering felt transformed, as though they had stepped into another world, one shaped entirely by the power of music. Even the organizers of the event, who had initially expected only a brief, polite performance, were captivated. They exchanged glances, unable to hide their astonishment. What had started as a simple request had evolved into something far beyond their imagination. The woman on the stage, who had seemed ordinary moments ago, was now creating a moment that would be remembered long after the event ended. Some audience members leaned toward their neighbors, whispering in disbelief, "I never expected this. She's so talented. Where did this come from?" The words were soft, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. And yet, despite the surprise, there was a shared feeling of gratitude for being able to witness something so beautiful, so authentic. In a world that often overlooked quiet talent, the woman's hands continued to move across the keys with grace and precision, yet always with warmth and emotion. Every note seemed deliberate, every phrase intentional, yet she made it seem effortless. The audience could feel her connection to the music, the way it flowed from her heart and through her fingers into the room. It was not just a performance. It was a sharing of herself, a gift that touched everyone present. Some listeners found themselves smiling softly, caught up in the beauty of the moment. Others felt a quiet ache of emotion, moved by the depth and honesty of the music. Even those who had been skeptical at first could not deny what they were hearing. This was no ordinary talent. This was a rare, extraordinary gift, revealed quietly and humbly before their eyes. The music began to take on a more complex rhythm, yet it never lost its gentle, flowing quality. She moved seamlessly between different phrases, weaving them together into a tapestry of sound that felt alive and breathing. The audience could feel the effortlessness of her playing, the natural grace with which she turned a simple tune into something remarkable. A few people in the back of the hall shifted in their seats, craning their necks to see her hands. They wanted to understand how she could create such beauty, how someone so unassuming could hold the room in awe so completely. Yet, no matter how closely they watched, it remained a mystery, a magic that seemed to come from her very soul. The hall remained silent, filled only with the music. There were no distractions, no interruptions, just the quiet harmony of sound and emotion. Every person present was fully engaged, completely absorbed in the moment. It was as if time itself had slowed, allowing everyone to savor the beauty and power of her performance. Even as she continued, the audience felt the story unfolding. They could sense the highs and lows, the playful moments and the quiet reflections. The music spoke directly to their hearts, evoking feelings that were personal yet universal. It was a reminder of the power of art, of how something simple could transform an ordinary evening into a memory that would last a lifetime. As the third part of her performance drew on, there was a growing sense of anticipation in the room. People were no longer just listening, they were participating emotionally in the journey she was creating. Each note built upon the last, leading to something greater, something that would leave everyone in awe. And still, through it all, she remained humble, focused, and serene. She did not seek applause or recognition. She played because it was who she was, because the music needed to be shared. The audience could feel this sincerity, and it made the experience all the more powerful. By the end of this part, it was clear The simple request that had started the evening had already become something extraordinary. The woman had captivated everyone in the hall, drawing them into a world of sound and emotion that none of them would forget. They were witnessing more than music, they were witnessing. The music had been building slowly, drawing the audience in with each note, each gentle rise and fall. But now it began to grow in intensity. The woman's fingers moved with a graceful precision, faster and more confidently than before, yet every movement was controlled, deliberate, and full of expression. The simple tune she had been asked to play had long vanished. In its place was a rich, intricate masterpiece that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. People sat leaning forward, unable to tear their eyes away from the piano. Some were holding their breath, as if afraid that even a small sound might break the spell of the moment. Others were silently mouthing the notes as though trying to match the beauty of the music with their own hearts. There was a shared, almost electric feeling in the room, a sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something rare and unforgettable. The melody rose and fell, at times soft and tender, at times bold and commanding. It was as if the piano itself were alive, responding to the woman's emotions and intent. The music seemed to tell a story that no words could ever convey. Listeners could feel joy, sorrow, excitement, and calm, all flowing together in a seamless harmony that captivated everyone present. Her fingers moved in a blur, yet the notes remained clear and distinct. Every chord she played seemed carefully chosen, not for show, but for its ability to express what she felt in the moment. The audience could sense that this was not merely a technical display of skill, it was a performance from the heart, a reflection of something deeply personal and yet universally touching. The air in the hall was thick with emotion. Some audience members had tears in their eyes, though they did not try to hide them. Others smiled softly, feeling a quiet warmth spread through them as they listened. Even those who had been skeptical when she first approached the piano were now completely captivated. Every sound, every pause, every soft trill seemed to pull them closer into the world she was creating. At times, the music would swell dramatically, filling the hall with sounds so powerful that it felt almost like the walls themselves were vibrating with it. The audience instinctively leaned back slightly, caught off guard by the intensity, yet unable to look away. Then, just as suddenly, the notes would soften, delicate and light, as though whispering directly to each person in the room. The contrast made the performance feel alive, unpredictable, and utterly mesmerizing. The woman's expression remained calm, focused and serene, yet there was a faint glow of joy in her eyes. She was fully immersed in the music, yet aware of its effect on the listeners. She did not play for applause or recognition. She played because the music lived within her, because she had to share it. And the audience could feel this sincerity, which made every note even more powerful. Some of the children in the front row had their hands resting quietly in their laps, completely silent, eyes wide and fixed on her fingers. A few of the older attendees had leaned back in their chairs, taking deep, almost reverent breaths, as if trying to hold on to the moment forever. Even the event organizers, who had expected only a simple, brief performance, were now frozen in amazement, unable to look away. The music seemed to reach out, touching something deep within each listener. People felt memories surface, emotions stir, and hearts open in ways they had not expected. It was as if the piano were speaking directly to their souls, conveying feelings and stories that transcended words. Each note carried meaning, each pause offered reflection, and each rising melody lifted spirits higher. The performance was no longer just a display of skill, it was a journey. The woman guided her audience through moments of lightness and playfulness, followed by quiet reflection, followed by passionate intensity. The audience could feel the ebb and flow, sensing the story that unfolded with every chord. It was immersive, almost as if they were traveling alongside her through a landscape of sound and emotion. Some people unconsciously reached for their hands, to clasp them together, feeling the music resonate deep within. Others sat perfectly still, letting the notes wash over them. There were no distractions. There was no chatter, only the shared experience of the music filling the room. Even those who had come casually, not expecting much, were now caught completely in its magic. The woman's technique was flawless. But it was her expression, her heart, that made the performance unforgettable. She incorporated delicate runs, soft trills, and bold chords, balancing technical mastery with emotional depth. It was clear that every movement was intentional, every note placed with purpose. She had transformed a simple request into something that far surpassed anyone's expectations. The audience began to react more visibly as the performance reached its peak. Some people were sitting upright, their eyes wide, leaning toward the piano as though trying to absorb every detail. Others had tears silently rolling down their cheeks, unable to hide the impact of the music. Even those who had initially doubted her skill now sat completely captivated, feeling privileged to witness such talent. The hall seemed to breathe with the music. Every note lingered, creating a resonance that made the room feel alive. The piano sound wrapped around the audience, filling every corner, every heart. People could feel the power of the performance not just in their ears, but in their bodies. As if the music had taken on a physical presence that moved through the air, the story the woman was telling, through the piano, had reached a point of emotional climax. The melody soared, dramatic and passionate, lifting spirits high and leaving hearts racing. The audience sat in silent awe, absorbed completely in the unfolding masterpiece. Every eye was on her, every ear attuned to her fingers, and every heart open to the emotions she conveyed. And then, just when the intensity seemed at its peak, she softened the music again, bringing it down to delicate, quiet tones that felt like a gentle sigh. The contrast made the audience hold their breath, captivated by the beauty and control in her playing. It was a masterful balance, intensity and softness, excitement and reflection, complexity and simplicity all woven seamlessly together. Some people whispered to themselves, almost as if trying to understand what they were witnessing. "I've never heard anything like this," one murmured. "It's unbelievable." Others simply sat quietly, letting the music speak for itself, feeling the emotions that words could never capture. The room had become a place of shared experience, a space where ordinary expectations had been replaced by awe and wonder. The woman continued to play, never faltering, never losing the connection to the audience. Every phrase, every chord, every subtle change in tempo seemed perfectly timed to create maximum impact. It was clear that she was fully in command of her talent, yet she remained humble, as if surprised herself by the beauty of what was unfolding. The audience began to feel a sense of reverence for her. She had taken a simple request, a modest tune, and transformed it into a performance that touched every heart in the room. It was rare, breathtaking, and unforgettable. Some people could hardly believe what they were seeing and hearing. They were witnessing not just skill, but the emotional truth of a person expressing themselves fully, openly, and beautifully. The climax of the performance was near. The melody reached a final, soaring phrase that seemed to lift everyone's spirits, leaving them breathless and speechless. It was a moment of pure magic, a moment that would stay in the hearts of the audience forever. And then, just as suddenly as it had built, the music softened once more, flowing gently to a peaceful conclusion. As the last notes lingered in the hall, there was a moment of silence. A silence filled with awe, wonder, and the quiet acknowledgement that they had just experienced something extraordinary. People remained still, not daring to break the spell of the moment. They were fully aware that what had begun as a simple request had become a masterpiece that would be remembered for years to come. Finally, slowly, the audience began to react. Soft claps started at the front, growing louder and louder until the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood, some cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes, all expressing amazement and gratitude. The performance had not only exceeded expectations, it had shattered them. The woman remained at the piano for a moment, smiling softly, her eyes calm and serene. She did not speak, but her presence radiated humility and quiet satisfaction. She had shared something truly special, not for recognition, but because it was a part of her, and the audience had felt it deeply. The hall was buzzing with excitement. People talking to each other, praising the performance, sharing their astonishment. They asked each other where she had learned to play, how she had developed such talent, and why she had never performed publicly before. Everyone wanted to know more, but even without answers, they all felt privileged to have been present for such a rare and extraordinary moment. The simple request had grown into a performance that no one would forget. The music had touched hearts, inspired wonder, and revealed a hidden talent that had transformed an ordinary evening into something magical. It was a reminder that extraordinary things can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the simplest acts can create the most profound impact. And as the woman finally rose from the piano, allowing the applause to wash over her, it was clear to everyone in the room that they had witnessed something special, something that would be remembered. The hall was still buzzing with the echoes of applause. People were standing, clapping and cheering, some even whistling, unable to contain their amazement. The performance had ended, but the effect lingered in the room like a warm, glowing light. The ordinary woman who had quietly approached the piano had completely transformed the evening. She had taken a simple request and turned it into something unforgettable, something that would be remembered for years. Even as the clapping continued, the audience was not only applauding her skill, but also the honesty and emotion that had flowed through every note. There was no exaggeration, no showy display, only sincerity, humility, and talent. People around the room were talking to each other, their voices a mixture of astonishment and admiration. "I've never heard anything like that," one whispered. "It felt like she was speaking directly to my heart," said another. Some of the younger attendees were still wide-eyed, trying to process what they had just witnessed. A boy near the front whispered to his mother, "How can someone play like that? I've never heard music sound so real." His mother smiled softly, feeling the same wonder. People who had come expecting only a simple, polite tune left with something far greater, a memory that would stay with them forever. The woman finally rose from the piano bench, her movements calm and composed. She did not bow dramatically or seek attention. She simply acknowledged the applause with a quiet, grateful smile. It was clear to everyone that she did not perform for recognition. The joy she felt came from sharing something deeply personal, something that could connect with others without words. And that sincerity made her performance even more remarkable. As she stepped away from the piano, people began approaching her, their faces alight with excitement and curiosity. Some wanted to compliment her skill, others were eager to ask how she had learned to play so beautifully. "That was incredible," a man said quietly, still trying to catch his breath. "You made the music feel alive." A young woman added, "It was like the piano was telling a story and we were all part of it." Despite all the attention, she remained humble and gracious. She answered questions politely, sharing only what she felt comfortable sharing, never boasting about her ability. She spoke about how music had always been a part of her life, how it was something she had learned quietly without expecting praise. Her humility made the audience admire her even more. The combination of skill and modesty was rare, and it left a lasting impression on everyone present. The organizers of the event were stunned. They had expected a brief performance, a few simple notes to fill the evening. Instead, they had witnessed a full, heartfelt masterpiece that captivated every person in the room. They exchanged looks of astonishment and whispered to each other, realizing that this evening had become far more memorable than they had ever anticipated. Some people stayed after the event, lingering to talk about what they had heard. They shared their feelings with each other, describing how the music had touched them personally. "I felt like she was telling my story," one attendee said. "It's amazing how music can do that," replied another. The performance had created a shared connection, a bond among the audience members that went beyond casual conversation. The woman herself seemed unaffected by the attention. She quietly packed her things and spoke softly to her friend, who had encouraged her to play. "Thank you for believing in me," she said. Her friend smiled, knowing that the performance had exceeded even their highest expectations. The experience had not only surprised the audience, but had also reminded them that true talent often lives quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. As the audience began to leave the hall, Many paused to look back at the piano, still polished and gleaming in the soft light. It had been the vessel for something extraordinary, a simple instrument that had carried a story, emotions, and a rare human connection. People whispered to each other, reliving the performance in their minds, replaying the moments that had moved them most. Outside the hall, the evening had grown cooler, and the streets were quiet. But the impact of the performance lingered like an invisible thread connecting everyone who had been inside. People walked home in small groups, sharing their thoughts, smiling and shaking their heads in wonder. Some even found themselves humming the melody softly to themselves, unable to forget the music that had filled the room. The woman walked home slowly, her mind still alive with the notes she had played. She thought about the audience's reactions, the way people had leaned in, listened closely, and felt something beyond the surface. She did not feel pride in a boastful way, but a quiet satisfaction that she had shared something deeply meaningful. She had turned a simple request into a moment that touched lives. And that was enough. For many of the audience members, the performance became a story they would tell for years. They would describe how an ordinary woman, who had seemed so unassuming, had sat at a piano and created something magical. They would remember the emotion, the intensity and the beauty of the music, and how it had transformed a simple evening into something extraordinary. The performance also left a lasting impression on those who had doubted her initially. People who had assumed that she would play only a basic tune were now humbled, realizing that talent and passion could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. It was a lesson in humility, a reminder not to judge others by appearances, and a celebration of human creativity and potential. Over the following days, the story of the performance spread. Friends talked about it, neighbors shared it, and some even wrote small notes to the organizers, praising the evening and the remarkable pianist. The memory of her playing became a symbol of how a single act, a simple gesture, could have a profound impact on many lives. It reminded people that extraordinary moments often come from unexpected places. The woman herself returned to her life quietly. She continued to play the piano when she had time, not for recognition or applause, but because it brought her joy and allowed her to express herself. She never sought fame or attention, but the experience had reinforced something she already knew, that music, when played from the heart, had the power to touch lives in ways nothing else could. And in the halls, in the hearts of those who had listened, the memory of that evening remained alive. Every time they thought of the performance, they remembered the quiet, humble woman who had turned a simple request into a masterpiece. They remembered how the music had made them feel, how it had drawn them together, and how it had created a connection that went beyond words. The story became more than a single performance. It became a reminder of the beauty that could be found in simplicity, the power of authenticity, and the way talent could shine when given the opportunity. It was proof that even the smallest gestures, when done with sincerity, could create extraordinary outcomes. For those who had been there, the performance was more than music. It was inspiration. It was a lesson in patience, humility, and the quiet strength of human expression. It was proof that the ordinary could become extraordinary when passion and heart were poured into it. And for the woman, it was a confirmation of something she had always felt, that music was not just about notes, but about connection. Not about applause, but about touching hearts. Not about recognition, but about sharing a piece of oneself with the world. That evening, a simple request had become a masterpiece, and the memory of it would live on in the hearts of all who had been fortunate enough to witness it, even long after the hall had emptied. People spoke of the evening with a sense of wonder. They recalled the way the music had felt alive, the way it had carried emotion directly to them, and the humility of the woman who had shared it. It was not just a story of talent, but of humanity, a reminder that the simplest acts, performed with sincerity and heart, could leave the deepest impressions. And so, the evening became legend in its own quiet way, not because of grandeur or fame, but because it had touched something essential in everyone who was there. The simple request had grown into a memory that inspired, moved, and reminded people of the extraordinary beauty that exists in the world. often hidden in the most ordinary places. The woman never sought to recreate the moment, nor did she need to. The experience had already left its mark, both on her and on the audience. It was proof that magic exists in simple things, in quiet gestures, and in acts performed with love and sincerity. It was proof that the human spirit, expressed through passion and heart, could create something timeless, something unforgettable, and with that the story ended not in a final note, but in the hearts of those who had listened, a story that would live on as a quiet, shining memory of an ordinary woman who made the extraordinary possible.